After gaining independence at the end of the 18th century, the United States of America inherited the British colonial economy, which included the use of slaves as labor tools. That is the basic characteristic of the U.S. economy during this period. Over the centuries, tens of millions of black people were taken from their African homelands to colonial North America. There, they were stripped of their most basic human rights and treated as objects, a type of property for white people to buy and resell. By the mid-19th century, the American economy began to diverge with two clearly different directions. Accordingly, the northern states accelerated the industrialization process. The South followed the plantation economic model. This meant that the North did not depend on slaves and needed a free labor force to serve the industrial market, while the South was the opposite. Farms in this area relied entirely on slaves as the main source of labor. In 1837, the United States had a total of 26 states, including 13 free states and 13 slave states. When the United States developed its territory further west of the North American continent, through a series of trade deals with England, France, Spain, Russia, war with Mexico, and signing an annexation treaty with Texas. Every time a new territory joined the Union, they were faced with a choice of becoming a free state or following slavery. In order to protect slavery, Southern slave owners sought to isolate and control the development of the domestic economic system by importing foreign goods. They prevent Northern products from entering the Southern market. This not only seriously affects the interests of the Northern bourgeoisie, but also directly harms the interests of the nation. In 1854, abolitionists founded the Republican Party, which quickly won the support of the Northern bourgeoisie. They developed into a powerful counterweight to the pro-slavery Democratic Party in the South. 1860, the United States held a presidential election, despite not getting any votes from the Southern states. Abraham Lincoln, with an overwhelming majority of electoral votes from free states, was elected and became the 16th President of the United States of America. December 20, 1860, the state of South Carolina declared secession from the United States of America. 2 months later, 6 more Southern states left the Union. On February 4, 1861, these states established the Confederate government, with Jefferson Davis as president, and established their own armies. Of course, the Northern federal government does not recognize it and considers this an act of treason. Once formed, the Confederacy began seizing federal property located in their territory. On December 26, 1860, Charleston, South Carolina, Union Major Robert Anderson secretly moved his command post from the defenseless Fort Moultrie at the town of Sullivan's Island to Fort Sumter, a key fort at the entrance to the harbor. Confederate-controlled Charleston in South Carolina. Right after that, the Confederacy issued an ultimatum: withdraw from Fort Sumter immediately, but no response. 4:30 a.m. on April 12, 1861. Southern troops began shelling the station with cannon batteries around the port. Although the Northern garrison returned fire, they were clearly outgunned, and after 34 hours, Anderson agreed to withdraw. The American Civil War broke out. Response to the South's provocative actions. On April 15, Lincoln called on the states to deploy 75,000 volunteer troops for 90 days to suppress the rebellion and preserve the unity of the federal court. His actions caused 4 more states, Virginia, Tennessee, Arkansas, and North Carolina, to secede and join the Confederacy. To reward Virginia, the capital of the Confederacy was moved to Richmond. To suppress the rebellion of the Confederacy, the Northern Command devised a military strategy known as the Anaconda Plan, proposed by General Winfield Scott. According to this plan, the first step was to establish a blockade along the entire eastern and southern coast of the Confederate territory, cutting off all supply lines and maritime support. Subsequently, Northern forces would advance to seize control of the vital transportation axis, the Mississippi River, and divide the Confederate territory into 2. Finally, to bring the war to an end, the core armed forces of the Northern Army would launch a decisive attack and capture the Confederate capital of Richmond. Just a few months after the conclusion of the battle at Fort Sumter, the Union called for a campaign against the capital of the Confederacy, Richmond, Virginia. July 1861. General Irvin McDowell led the Union Army across Bull Run, advancing towards Richmond. For defense, the Confederacy employed two army wings. The first wing, commanded by General Beauregard, camped near Manassas Junction to block the main Northern force. The second wing, under General Joseph E. Johnston, positioned itself in the Shenandoah Valley, in the state of West Virginia. In total, both sides had approximately 70,000 troops engaged. July 21, 1861. Prince William County, Virginia, just north of the city of Manassas and about 30 miles west-southwest of Washington, D.C. First Battle of Bull Run. McDowell's ambitious plan to launch a surprise attack on the left flank of the Confederacy force did not go smoothly due to the lack of combat experience among its officers and soldiers. However, with more troops, the Union gradually gained the advantage. After some Union advantages, Confederate reinforcements from the Shenandoah Valley led by Brigadier General Joseph E. Johnston arrived by train, and the tide of battle began to turn. The Southern Army launched a fierce counterattack. The Northern Army began to be pushed back. Under pressure from the Southern troops, many Northern soldiers panicked and turned the retreat into a chaotic rout in the direction of Washington, D.C. The defeat at Bull Run marked the beginning of a series of consecutive losses for the Northern Army, extending until the end of 1861, forcing them to face the prospect that they might not be the triumphant side in the conflict. In early 1862, General Ulysses S. Grant, commanding the Western Front, achieved some significant victories, making the overall war effort easier for the Union. In March 1862, the Union Army launched the Peninsula Campaign. The plan involved one wing advancing on Richmond through the Virginia Peninsula in the southeast, combined with a northern advance to surround the Confederacy capital. However, this plan quickly fell apart as the Confederacy forces redirected troops to the Shenandoah Valley in the north, tying up a large portion of the Union Army and preventing them from participating in the campaign. Despite this setback, the southeastward advance on Richmond continued. To preserve their forces, the Confederacy, under the direct command of General Johnston, had to withdraw to defend Richmond. May 1862, in Richmond, General Robert E. Lee, the most outstanding officer of the Confederate Army, assumed the position of overall commander, replacing General Johnston. In a 7-day period from June 25 to July 1, 1862, near Richmond, Virginia, General Robert E. Lee led the Confederate Army in a counterattack against General George B. McClellan's Army of the Potomac, which was threatening the Confederate capital. After 6 battles in 7 days, General Lee emerged victorious. The Union Army were driven out of the Richmond area and had to withdraw from the Virginia Peninsula. During this time, on the Western Front, the Union Army of the Tennessee, commanded by Major General Ulysses S. Grant, marched along the Tennessee River to advance into the territory of Tennessee and established a camp at Shiloh on the river's western bank. There, they were unexpectedly attacked by Confederate Army under Generals Albert Sidney Johnston and Beauregard. Despite the surprise, with resilience and determination surpassing most other Northern commanders at that time, Grant bravely led his soldiers in a fierce resistance and successfully defeated the besieging forces. This battle is considered one of the bloodiest in North American history up to that point. The victory at Shiloh solidified the Army of the Tennessee as one of the strongest armies in the ongoing conflict. While fierce land battles were taking place offshore, the Union Navy captured numerous important southern coastal ports and fortresses, providing a solid foundation for their strategic push up the Mississippi River and the capture of New Orleans. Returning to the Eastern Front, after the disastrous failure of the Peninsula Campaign, President Lincoln continued to launch a campaign to attack Virginia. In late August 1862, the Second Battle of Bull Run erupted. This became the decisive battle of the entire campaign. Faced with approximately 62,000 Union troops commanded by General John Pope against 50,000 Confederate troops commanded by General Robert E. Lee. After more than a day of fierce fighting, General Robert E. Lee ordered Lieutenant General Stonewall Jackson's troops to withdraw into a defensive position along an unfinished railroad. August 29, General Pope, thinking that Jackson was in a vulnerable position, launched a series of attacks on Jackson's positions. General Pope was unaware that General Lee had ordered Lieutenant General James Longstreet to lead a flanking maneuver on his right flank. August 30, the first wave of attacks by the Union was shattered by the Confederate artillery. Subsequently, 5 infantry divisions, totaling 25,000 troops under Longstreet's direct command, surged into the Union Army. This was the largest human wave attack of the Civil War. The left flank of the Union Army was shattered, and the Northern forces had to retreat towards Bull Run. In the end, General Pope's army struggled hard to withdraw to Centerville. While the fierce battles were raging, forces on the other side of the Atlantic, especially the United Kingdom, were seeking ways to intervene in the American Civil War. The reason for this interest was that, for many months, Southern cotton products couldn't be shipped to Europe because the Union Navy had complete control over the sea routes. Cotton was a crucial commodity for the textile industry in the Old World. After consecutive failures of the Union Army, British leaders concluded that the Union couldn't win and began leaning towards supporting the Confederacy, hoping to gain support from Europe and force the Union into negotiations. September 4, 1862, General Robert E. Lee made a bold decision: the Maryland Campaign. He commanded over 55,000 troops to cross the border and attack the Union. The initial plan was for General Lee to split his forces to surround the cities of Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, and Hagerstown, Maryland. Afterward, they would regroup, block and defeat the Union forces coming to rescue these cities. However, the Union discovered a misplaced copy of General Lee's detailed battle plans. General McClellan, the overall commander of the Union Army, seized the opportunity and reorganized his forces. McClellan ordered the garrison at Harper's Ferry to hold out to delay General Stonewall Jackson's besieging forces. Subsequently, McClellan launched a direct attack on General Lee's 2 army wings at South Mountain, forcing Lee's forces to withdraw to Sharpsburg. Here, both sides concentrated their entire forces for a crucial battle. September 17, 1862, at Antietam Creek near Sharpsburg, Maryland, the Battle of Antietam officially began. General McClellan led the 75,000-strong Union Army against General Robert E. Lee's approximately 35,000 Confederate troops. Despite the Union Army being outnumbered, General Lee used strategic brilliance to mobilize his entire army and create an opportunity to withstand the Northern forces. Eventually, General Lee was forced to withdraw back to Virginia. The Battle of Antietam lasted less than a day but became the bloodiest and most intense battle of the Civil War, surpassing even the previous Battle of Shiloh. In just over 12 hours of fighting, approximately 23,000 soldiers, with over 10,000 on each side, were killed or wounded. On September 17, 1862, more Americans died than on any other day in the nation's military history. Despite heavier losses, the Union Army successfully pushed the Confederate troops back to Virginia, safeguarding the nation's heartland and thwarting the Confederacy's efforts to seek support from across the Atlantic. In 1863, President Abraham Lincoln officially issued the Emancipation Proclamation, a document considered one of the most important in American history since its founding. The proclamation contributed to shaping the image of the Union Army as a force fighting for freedom and justice. It boosted the morale of African Americans, both free and enslaved, encouraged many to escape slavery and seek refuge within the Union, where they often joined the Union Army. It also put an end to foreign powers' potential involvement in the internal strife. May 1863, General Robert E. Lee led his troops through the Shenandoah Valley, initiating the second invasion of the North, the Gettysburg Campaign. General Lee planned to penetrate deep into the North, cross Maryland, and hoped to capture Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, or even Philadelphia, creating a pincer movement to encircle and isolate the Northern capital, Washington, to exert political pressure and force Northern politicians to negotiate a ceasefire. June 3, 1863, from Fredericksburg, Virginia, Lee's army began its march northwards. For better command, he reorganized his 2 large corps into 3 new corps. Among them, Lieutenant General James Longstreet remained the commander of the 1st Corps. The old corps of fallen General Thomas J. Jackson was divided into 2, including the 2nd Corps commanded by Lieutenant General Richard S. Ewell and the 3rd Corps commanded by Lieutenant General A. P. Hill. Major General J. B. Stuart remained the commander of the Cavalry Corps. July 1, 1863, the advancing Confederate Army, commanded by General Hill, unexpectedly encountered the Union I Corps under the command of Major General John F. Reynolds, near Chambersburg Pike, about 3 miles west of the town. The Battle of Gettysburg began. After 3 days of intense fighting and failing to capture Gettysburg, on July 4, 1863, General Robert E. Lee was forced to withdraw his troops to the south. The Gettysburg campaign came to an end. The Battle of Gettysburg is considered a turning point in the American Civil War. It weakened the morale of the Confederate forces and made the Northern Union victory only a matter of time. It was also the battle with the highest casualties for both sides, with approximately 50,000 soldiers being casualties, evenly distributed between the two. Concurrently with General Lee's Gettysburg campaign, in the Western Front, approximately 900 miles from Gettysburg, the Union's Army of the Tennessee, commanded by Major General Ulysses S. Grant, launched the Vicksburg campaign to gain control of the entire Mississippi River. This river was a crucial lifeline connecting the eastern and western states of the Southern Confederacy. July 4, 1863, after a 2-month siege, Vicksburg, a strategically important position on the banks of the Mississippi River, surrendered. The Confederacy was now split into two halves, east and west, unable to support each other. General Grant, recognized for his outstanding performance on the battlefield, was appointed as the overall commander of the Union Army by President Lincoln. Upon assuming command, he immediately ordered a coordinated offensive on all fronts. June 1864, General Ulysses S. Grant, leading over 120,000 troops, initiated a series of campaigns to advance towards Richmond. The Union Army faced fierce resistance from the Confederate Army under General Lee's command. Continuous engagements between the two sides resulted in 80,000 casualties within just 6 weeks. General Lee's army were dwindling in size, reducing to approximately 55,000, while General Grant's army grew stronger due to recruitment and policies encouraging African Americans to join. Despite Lee's efforts, he had to fight a defensive battle and retreat towards Richmond. He established defensive lines around the capital, intending to engage in a decisive battle with the Union. Contrary to the expectations that the enemy would push them back to the capital and besiege it, the Union Army surrounded Petersburg, cutting off the vital railway supply line to Richmond. General Ulysses S. Grant's troops constructed over 40 miles of extensive trenches from the eastern suburbs of Richmond, Virginia, to the eastern and southern outskirts of Petersburg. April 1, 1865, Grant's army cut the last railroad supplying Lee's army in Petersburg and launched a comprehensive assault along the entire defensive line. April 3, 1865, overwhelmed by the Union Army, General Lee ordered the evacuation of both Petersburg and the Confederate capital, Richmond. Hoping to retreat to the southwest and regroup with Southern forces in North Carolina, but Lee's army was relentlessly pursued by Grant's army. Due to overwhelming force and logistical shortages, General Robert E. Lee agreed to surrender on April 9 at Appomattox Courthouse. On that day, 27,805 Confederate soldiers passed through and stacked their weapons. Confederate soldiers were not detained or prosecuted for treason. They were allowed to keep their horses, mules, and personal belongings as they returned home. The victorious side did not gloat over the defeat of the other. This approach helped the United States quickly heal the wounds of war, fostering unity and strength that propelled the nation to become a leading global power in the future. Although there were subsequent minor skirmishes, April 9, 1865, is considered the end of the American Civil War.